The hidden desire to be seen without explaining yourself. There is a quiet longing that lives beneath language, a desire not to be understood through effort, but recognized without translation. It appears in moments when words feel insufficient, when explaining feels like shrinking something vast into something manageable, when the inner world feels too complex, too tender to summarize. Many carry this desire silently, not because they lack words, but because they are tired of performing clarity. They want to be seen as they are, not as they can describe themselves, to be felt, not analyzed, to exist without justifying every emotion, every pause, every depth. This longing is not about attention. It is about resonance, about the hope that somewhere, someone might look closely enough to understand, without being told how. This is the psychology of that hidden wish, and the quiet inner life it shapes. There is a place inside that wishes to be noticed without translation. Not through explanation, not through justification, not through the careful shaping of words. Simply seen. This longing often forms quietly, in early moments when expression feels complicated or unrewarded. A glance missed, a sigh misunderstood, a feeling that needed containment instead of acknowledgement. The person learns quickly that words can fail, that attempts to describe the self may reduce it, distort it, or invite judgment. So the mind begins to protect its depth, keeping some things unspoken, not from shame, not from fear, but from a quiet wisdom born of experience. In daily life, this manifests as selective sharing. A person offers what feels safe, manageable, or likely to resonate, and the rest, the raw, complicated interior, remains private. It is a hidden landscape, full of color and motion, alive yet reserved. The desire to be seen without explaining is not about invisibility. It is about integrity. It is the hope that someone might understand without asking for a translation. That connection might happen through presence alone, through recognition, through attunement. This chapter explores that initial longing, how it emerges in the tender spaces of early awareness, how it quietly shapes attention, interaction, and emotional life, and how, for many, it becomes a guiding rhythm, listening for resonance, offering pieces, and holding the rest, until someone notices it without words. The desire to be seen without explaining is often born where expression once felt unsafe, not in dramatic moments of trauma, but in quiet patterns that teach the child caution. Perhaps feelings were dismissed. Perhaps curiosity was met with impatience. Perhaps vulnerability caused discomfort in those around them. The child learns early that speaking openly carries consequences, not punishment necessarily, but subtle shifts in attention, tone, and warmth. An unanswered question, a hurried reply, a sigh that signals this is too much. In these spaces, explanation becomes exhausting. It demands energy, care, and negotiation, and rarely guarantees understanding. So the child begins to adapt. They offer only what seems safe to share. They learn to compress their interior world into fragments that can be easily held by others. The rest remains private, kept intact, preserved, unspoken. This adaptation is not avoidance. It is self-preservation, a quiet strategy to maintain presence without creating imbalance, a way to be visible without overexposure. Over time, this pattern deepens. Expression becomes measured. Emotion becomes selective. The person learns to navigate relationships with care, sharing what can be accepted and protecting what cannot. And yet, the hidden desire remains. The wish to be recognized without translation persists beneath careful restraint. It waits patiently for someone, or something, to notice it. not through explanation, but through attunement, through understanding that does not need words, through resonance alone. The brain of someone who wishes to be seen without explaining learns early to contain complexity. It becomes practiced at holding more than it shares. Emotion, thought, nuance, all are experienced fully, yet filtered before they meet the outside world. Neuroscience shows that in sensitive or unpredictable environments, the nervous system develops heightened vigilance. The mind notices shifts in tone, posture, and energy before noticing its own impulses. It becomes skilled at reading others, while keeping some pieces of self private. This is not repression. It is protection. A quiet, internal curation of what is offered and what is withheld. In adulthood, this manifests as selective expression. Words are chosen carefully, gestures measured, emotions moderated. The inner world remains dense, layered, and rich, yet largely unseen. This holding shapes perception. The person senses more than they speak. They understand nuance that escapes others. They perceive depth in moments that feel trivial to most. Yet this strength carries weight. The desire to be noticed without explaining persists, often silently urgent. The mind longs for recognition that does not require translation, for someone to perceive the unspoken without interrogation. Here, the psychological pattern is clear. Internal richness paired with selective visibility. A skill learned for safety, now a defining rhythm. The hidden desire lives in the space between what is shown and what remains sacred. It is quiet, powerful, and waiting to be seen without the need for word. To be seen without explaining oneself is to walk a delicate line. Visibility and vulnerability exist in constant tension. The more one reveals, the more one risks misunderstanding. The more one withholds, the more one risks invisibility. This tension shapes thought and behavior. Every word, every gesture, every disclosure is weighed against an internal scale. Will this be received as I intend, or will it require justification? The person learns to navigate relationships with care. They offer glimpses of self, small windows into a deeper interior, while keeping vast portions private. They listen more than they speak, attune more than they assert. Expression is selective, deliberate, protective. Yet inside, a quiet restlessness persists. A yearning for recognition that does not demand explanation. A wish that someone might witness the depth of being without prompting, without interrogation, without needing every nuance unpacked. This tension creates subtle fatigue. It is not overt stress, but an ongoing negotiation between the desire to connect and the need for safety. The inner world remains full, yet partially hidden. Here, emotional self-protection is both gift and limitation. It allows presence without chaos. Yet it also creates a shadow of longing, the ache of being known, not by what can be summarized, but by what is simply. This chapter explores that quiet negotiation, the ways the self learns restraint, the invisible cost of careful presence, and the enduring hope for recognition without explanation, a hope that shapes perception, choice, and connection throughout life. There comes a moment when the hidden desire to be seen without explaining can no longer stay dormant. It surfaces quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet with undeniable presence. Perhaps it arrives in relationships where connection feels partial. Perhaps it emerges in solitude, when the mind weighs how much of itself has remained contained. Perhaps it appears in reflection, an aching awareness of all the times one has translated depth into fragments, hoping it will be enough. At first, it is subtle, a pang of longing, a restless curiosity about what it would feel like to be understood without justification, a wish that recognition could happen naturally, without careful performance. The nervous system hesitates here. It recalls why restraint once mattered. It remembers the subtle lessons. Safety comes from holding back, from controlling exposure, from protecting complexity. And yet, the desire is persistent. This is not rebellion. It is consciousness. The person notices the gap between the richness inside and the pieces shared outside. They sense what has been missing, not attention, not applause, but attunement. The moment is delicate, almost invisible. Carries no urgency, no demand. It simply exists, a gentle awareness that the self longs to be met without translation, that the inner world is worthy of resonance as it is. This chapter explores that awakening, the realization of the hidden desire, its subtle insistence, and the quiet recognition that some parts of the self have been waiting patiently to be noticed without explanation. Healing the desire to be seen without explaining does not begin with words. It begins with permission. Permission to exist fully, without shaping oneself to be digestible. Permission to feel without immediately translating emotions into comprehensible stories. Permission to be noticed simply for being. The nervous system, long trained in vigilance, begins to learn a new rhythm. Safety no longer requires containment. Connection no longer demands explanation. The inner world, once carefully managed, can rest without constant curation. This process is subtle and gentle. It unfolds in small acts. Lingering in thought, allowing emotions to surface, speaking only when it feels authentic. It is not a rush to share, but an easing of the habitual restraint. The person learns that presence itself is enough, that resonance can occur without translation, that visibility does not have to be negotiated. Silence does not vanish. It softens. It becomes choice rather than strategy. A companion, not a guard. There is compassion here for the self who learned restraint so early, for the part that adapted, that observed, that contained. It is honored, not erased. Learning to exist without performance means allowing the self to occupy space quietly, fully, without apology. Expression and privacy coexist. Observation and vulnerability balance. The hidden desire is no longer frustrated, it is witnessed. And in this gentle allowance, presence becomes its own reward. Recognition comes not from explanation, but from attunement. And the inner world, long contained, finally breathes. When the need to explain softens, presence itself becomes enough. The hidden desire, to be understood without justification, finds a home in quiet recognition. Visibility no longer demands performance. Expression does not require translation. The self is allowed to exist in its full complexity, tender and unmeasured. The person carries both depth and discretion. The inner world remains rich, layered, alive, yet now it can be witnessed without needing to be summarized. Connection arrives through attunement, through resonance, through the simple act of noticing. Silence, once a shield, now rests beside authenticity. It supports rather than restricts, holding space for both what is shared and what is private. The part of the self that learned restraint early is honored, not erased, not forced into openness. It is recognized as wise, protective, and profoundly human. Here, being seen does not require explanation. It comes gently, in the subtle responses of another, in the way presence acknowledges presence, in the quiet reflection that mirrors understanding without words. The hidden desire is no longer a longing. It becomes a lived experience, a quiet certainty that the self matters as it is. Expression and containment coexist. Vulnerability and safety are not at odds. Depth and connection are possible without negotiation. In this softened visibility, the self breathes fully. It is enough to be noticed, not because you have explained yourself, but because you simply are.